Hey guys, here's my attempt at creating a definitive guide to four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive systems. Every time we go off-roading or every time we're at somebody's house at a party and having a few drinks, this ends up being a heated all-night argument about how this guy's system is better than this guy's, and back and forth. And what I really don't understand is how a lot of guys don't really understand the workings of the vehicle they drive. One thing to keep in mind is there's no magic here, or there's no magic in any of these systems. These systems have been around since the Willys Jeep. They've been improved upon, but the principles remain the same. But if you think that your new Defender has a better system than a Land Rover LR3, then you'd be mistaken. It might have more aids to support the actual four-wheel drive system, but in the end the principles that it uses are exactly the same. So when I first started putting together the notes for this video, it seemed pretty easy at first, but then I came to the conclusion that the world of four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive is pretty muddled right now. The way that manufacturers use the term is very different. You know, Subaru might be calling their system an all-wheel drive system, and then BMW might be calling a very similar system a four-wheel drive system. So there's a fine line between what an all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive system is, and where the line is, how they differ. So for the intents of this video, I think the term four-wheel drive should be used only when the system has the ability to lock the distribution of power equally 50-50 between the front and the rear differentials. The term all-wheel drive in this case will be applied only to the systems that do not have that ability. I will split the video into 4 parts. The first part will be full-time four-wheel drive, the second part will be part-time four-wheel drive, and the third part will be all-wheel drive, and then the fourth part will be the various aids that are used to supplement the mechanicals of these systems. Okay, let's get on with it. So the first system we'll discuss is the permanent or full-time four-wheel drive system. Now, in my opinion, this is the cream of the crop, as it combines all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive into one. It's also a system that can be used in all conditions all the time, as the name implies. So how does it work? So a full-time four-wheel drive system will use a transfer case and have the ability to lock and unlock the center differential at will. This is either done automatically, such as in a Land Rover LR3 or a Grand Cherokee quadra-drive system, for example, or manually via a button or shifter, such as in a Grand Cherokee Select-Track system or a Hummer H3, H2 system. That is really the big thing here. If you cannot unlock the equal transfer of power, then you would not be able to use the system on hard-packed surfaces without causing damage to your drivetrain. So if you look at my crude drawing here, front of the vehicle, front pumpkin, front differential, drive shaft, transfer case, transmission, transferring power to the transfer case, drive shaft to the back, pumpkin, differential. So what this system is able to do is either lock these two drive shafts together or have a differential mechanism between these two that allows them to work independently of each other. So the big differences in this system are in how the differentials how the center differential is locked or unlocked. This can be done in multiple ways. It can be manually locked or unlocked by either a console shifter, such as in a Jeep Select-Track system or Liberty, or a button, such as on the Hummer H2 or H3. It can also be electronically locked, such as is the case on a Land Rover LR3 system. The computer will make the decision on when to lock the diff based on the terrain response setting or the input from the gas pedal, speed sensors, and etc. etc. It can also be automatically locked using oil pumps, viscous couplers, or clutch packs, such as in a Jeep quadra-drive system. The decision is made automatically by the vehicle according to predetermined slippage, heat, or oil flow parameters. For example, vehicle loses traction in the front wheels, meaning front and rear drive shaft speeds differ, differential locks. Now, that's all there is to it. There's of course some overlays to these above systems. An electronically controlled clutch pack, BMW X-Drive, for example. The principles remain the same. Also, a full-time four-wheel drive system can very easily incorporate a part-time setting as well, because it already has a transfer case built into it. It can also very easily incorporate low-range settings for that same reason. We will discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this system later. Okay, so we'll move on to the part-time four-wheel drive system. As the name implies, this is a system that can only be used when conditions are favorable, part-time. Such systems are widely used in Toyota's, Nissan's American pickup trucks, including the original Raptor, actually, which is kind of weird. The system is simple and robust and inexpensive. It has limitations, though, which we will discuss later. Essentially, this is a system that has a transfer case, just like the full-time four-wheel drive system, but does not have the ability to decouple the connection between the front and rear differentials. So when you're in four-wheel drive mode, when you click the selector into four-wheel drive, you are always locked. So what does that mean when you're always locked? You don't have this differential mechanism here anymore. You do still have the transfer case, which is this. Transfer case. Still have the transfer case. The whole system looks identical, but you don't have the ability to have either of these differentials work independently. So this is basically always locked, right? And that's basically it. That's why these systems are part-time, because there's equal amount of power going to the front and rear differential, and there's no differential mechanism here. So when you're trying to take a corner, and let's say you're turning left, these tires are spinning slower. There's even though this differential might be open and this differential might be open, this one will bind and cause skippage or other weird stuff to happen, which is detrimental to your driveline. The torque split is basically always a forced 50-50. 50% here, 50% here, right? And there's no way to differentiate. Nothing is here to allow for any slippage. So it's basically always a diagonal. And this is a problem on hard pack surfaces, as I said before. So systems like these are usually rear-wheel drive only until the front differential is needed, at which point a button or a console shift or something like that is used to select 4x4. There are some exceptions to this rule, such as an automatic 4x4 setting on a Chevy Avalanche or some newer pickup trucks. That auto setting should not be mistaken for permanent four-wheel drive, though, as it is only a system for automatically coupling of the front differential when slip is detected. So, it's reacting. And it still does not have the ability to stay permanently on all surfaces. We'll discuss the advantages and disadvantages of a system like this, of the part-time system, later. Okay, now we'll move on to all-wheel drive. This is when the conversations really get heated up. An all-wheel drive system transfers power to the front and rear wheels, but will always have the ability to differential the power between the front and rear wheels. So most all-wheel drive systems are permanent, such as Audi Quattro, but some can be on demand, like a Ford Fusion system or the Escape or any number of the new crossovers and stuff like that. The power transfer is always variable and seldom 50-50, front to rear. And where the conversation really gets muddled is with systems like the Quattro or Subaru's Impreza STI system, where the center differential can be locked. So in my opinion, at that moment, those systems become four-wheel drive system and should be named accordingly. In either case, a couple different methods are used on these systems, and we'll discuss them here. So how do these systems work? As I said before, there's a few systems used on these. A very common one is still a transfer case, such as on a four-wheel drive system. The transfer case can be mechanical, like a torsion differential, or clutch oil pump electronically operated, something like that. Unlike true four-wheel drive systems, most of these transfer cases will not be standalone, so you won't have a transfer case sitting in between your transmission and your drive line, but rather it'll be integrated into the transmission housing, like on the AWD torsion or Subaru symmetrical all-wheel drive, for example. It's integrated into the actual transmission housing. The other system used in all-wheel drive is a coupled all-wheel drive, which means it has some sort of a power transfer unit, PTU. These are the simplest and most popular systems. The vehicle is either rear or front drive biased, but will have a PTU mounted on either the front or rear differential, and power is transferred through a drive shaft to the opposing differential. Most PTUs will have will be clutch operated, but some can be electronically connected according to the parameters that are set by the computer, monitoring wheel speed sensors and steering angles and stuff like that. Most crossovers these days will use a system like that, and that's about it. So what are the advantages of all these systems? So permanent full-time four-wheel drive. The biggest advantage of this system is the ability to switch between true four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, meaning the vehicle will become more versatile and safer. Another advantage is having a transfer case makes the system stronger, but at the same time, manufacturers are able to add low gearing, for instance, to add versatility to the off-road platform. So what are the disadvantages? So one big disadvantage is the fact that this system, because it's permanent, with some exceptions, such as in a Jeep Grand Cherokee Select Track, where you can select two-wheel drive mode only. So the biggest disadvantage is that because they're permanent, is all of these driveline components are always spinning, regardless if you're using four-wheel drive and you're off-road somewhere or not. Because the transmission is always sending power to the transfer case, and there is a differential mechanism here, there is no way to, if you're in permanent full-time four-wheel drive, all of these drive shafts, everything here is always spinning. So it puts more driveline wear on the whole systems. Axles, drive shaft will wear faster. This can be controlled somewhat by having either manual or automatic locking front hubs, so the front hubs would sit here, and you would basically decouple them by turning a little knob on each end, or have spring-loaded automatic ones in here, and then you kind of decouple them, so you disconnect the system, and that way this is all kind of free spinning and no longer puts that much wear on the driveline. But nobody really uses that anymore, I don't think, as they came with their own issues, and there was always issues with springs and rust inside there, and you couldn't turn them on and whatnot. Another disadvantage is the weight and the complexity of a system like this. These are heavy-duty systems, and to make them work properly, there will be chains, couplers, internal components, bearings that weigh a lot and are quite complex. Probably not the easiest things to rebuild. I've done a few transfer cases in my life, and sometimes it's just not worth touching. One overlooked disadvantage of a system like this is an automatic locker, such as I will discuss later in the video towards the end. An automatic locker such as an Aussie or a Detroit cannot be used on the front differential because it'll be impossible to turn. Once you lock those two front wheels together, you will not have any steering on loose surfaces. I mean, you can kind of circumvent that if you do have the locking hubs, but as I said, most new systems don't have locking hubs anymore. Okay, we'll move on to part-time four-wheel drive advantages and disadvantages. The main advantage is robustness and simplicity. There's no clutches or extra differentials needed, as the system is driver controlled, with some exceptions, such what I mentioned about the Chevy's automatic 4x4 system. The systems also tend to be lighter as well, without the extra moving parts inside the transfer cases. Disadvantages, there's a few. The first being safety. If a driver doesn't turn on four-wheel drive ahead of time and hits black ice on the highway, for instance, then the situation might not be very favorable. That's also probably the reason for all the overturned Wranglers in the ditch every time we get an ice storm here in Canada. Wrangler actually has a part-time four-wheel drive system. If a driver turns the system on drive payment, too early, just to make sure that they're ready for any black ice or anything, then they're putting major wear, especially on the highway, they're putting major wear on the system, as there's no differential mechanism in the center. Stuff like a low tire, one corner, while you're in four-wheel drive on hard packed surfaces, a low tire, for example, in one corner will put so much stress on the system because this pent-up power has nowhere to go, right? This one tire is spinning faster or slower than the other tires. This power has nowhere to go. It has to get knocked out by basically friction of the wheel on the road surface or through the driveline somehow. The other disadvantage is drivability. Even with the system turned on, there's no way for it to vary torque front to rear. That's another problem on icy surfaces, especially at high speed. The system is always forced to be trying to split torque 50-50 between the front and rear to try and send an equal amount of power to either the front and rear. This may upset the vehicle when you're traveling on the highway and you hit some black ice or something again. If you have a high power vehicle such as a V8 or something, it might upset it because there's no differential mechanism again, right? So there's some disadvantages to this system. I'm not a big fan of part-time four-wheel drive systems. Let's move on to all-wheel drive advantages and disadvantages. So safety is the number one advantage of this system. Vehicles, awesome stability at all times on favorable road surfaces. Simplicity, it's basically dummy proof. Get in and drive, nothing really to know. Cost complexity is usually lower because you have less parts. It's a very inexpensive way to add stability to a car for little money, and pretty simple. That's probably why all the manufacturers right now have an all-wheel drive variant of most of their models. The disadvantages, reliability is one disadvantage. Unless a robust setup like a torsion is used, then these systems rely on a lot of friction devices, clutches and whatnot, which will wear. Unequal tire pressures will exacerbate problems like these. People don't pay attention to this stuff, but clutch backs, like I said before in the part-time overview, if you have low tire pressure on one tire, that pent-up power has to go somewhere. Another disadvantage is there's no true torque split in most cases. It is still very possible to get stuck if even one wheel is off the ground. Another perfect example of the limitations of a four-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive system as opposed to four-wheel drive is this. So in an all-wheel drive system or a full-time four-wheel drive setting on a four-wheel drive system, you have a differential here. Or you might not, such as in an added all-wheel drive system, which in that case you just have basically, that's what it looks like here. You have the front, the rear, and you basically just have a drive shaft, a little PTU unit here, and then you have a drive shaft connecting to the rear. But in either case, the major limitation is if this and this wheel, for instance, are off the ground, you're not going anywhere unless you have electronic aids or some limited slip aids inside these differentials. Right? So on a simple all-wheel drive system, if both of these wheels are sitting on ice, you're not going to go anywhere, because this differential mechanism will apply power to the wheel with the least traction. This differential will apply power to the wheel with least traction, and there's nothing telling it in the center, or in this case, there's nothing telling it to lock up and send power diagonally. So that is a huge limitation. I would imagine the same thing would happen if you lifted diagonals off the ground as well, right? Okay, let's move on to the aids.
Everyone has aids.
It's a fact that no 4x4 system is truly 4x4. It is essentially a 4x2 system. If two opposing wheels are off the ground, you're not going anywhere. So manufacturers have a whole bunch of toys these days at their disposal to combat this. The first of those toys is locking differentials. These differentials can be electronic, or such as a e-locker, or mechanical, like an Aussie system or something like that. The purpose of these is to lock both axles together and remove the differential mechanism out of the equation. A vehicle with front, center, and rear lockers, or locking differentials, is a true 4x4. Perfect example of this is a Mercedes G-Wagon. I mean, there is no doubt that system is superior to everything. Earlier Land Cruisers would have front and rear lockers as well as center lockers. Some Hummer H3 models had front and rear lockers as well. There's other various manufacturers. You can comment below. If you're serious about having a rig that's capable, you need at least a center diff lock, which most four-wheel drive systems will have, and either a rear or a front locker, preferably both. So what does a locker do? A locker locks this wheel and this wheel together. If you have it installed on the front, gets rid of the differential mechanism inside the pumpkin here. If you have a rear one, it locks both of these wheels together. So that way 25%, 25%, 25%, 25% of power is equally split into all four wheels. That is assuming that this center differential is locked. Some Audi models, earlier Audi models had lockers actually, and I think you could use them with having the center differential unlocked, but I can't really discuss that. I don't know much about it, so you can comment below. There's plenty of differential lockers available on the market depending on your budget and how much work you want to put in to actually install one. The easiest way to lock your diffs is using a mechanical or a torque locker. It's a spring-loaded automatic system that is always engaged. That's kind of the Aussie systems that I mentioned earlier. Detroit makes one as well. I don't know the other brands, but essentially what it is the system is always coupled. And then when differential force is detected, such as when you're taking a corner or something, on a parking lot or something like that, then the springs disengage and uncouple the differential, and you'll hear like a clicking noise or something like that, because the gears will always try and get back into the lock position, right, when you're moving. So you hear like a tick 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 tick. The main disadvantage of this system is you cannot install this locker on the front differential unless you have manual locking hubs, as there won't be enough force to disengage this locker on loose or icy surfaces. You will have no way of steering the vehicle on an icy surface. Trust me, I know I've done this on a Jeep Grand Cherokee WJ. I installed a locker in the front. It was a full-time four-wheel drive system. So basically, I couldn't use the car or the Jeep in permanent full-time all-wheel drive anymore, because on icy surfaces, because it had no steering. It would just go straight all the time. Also, there's a bit of a disadvantage even if you have it installed in the rear. Both wheels will spin at the same time all the time in a straight line, right? So when you're on the highway and you hit some black ice, this happens all the time, and the Trans Am has a limited slip differential. You hit some black ice and the car will go sideways immediately, because both wheels have equal power applied to them, so it just spins out. So that's another disadvantage. The second system is a e-locker design. This is by far the superior locker, and this design that is widely used by OEM manufacturers. A newer G-Wagon will have e-lockers, as will a Hummer H2, H3 will have e-lockers. Wrangler Rubicons will have e-lockers installed, and many other brands. The advantages are obvious. Turn it on as needed, press a button. The disadvantages are cost and complexity of the install, basically, right? How much time do you want to spend? How much money you want to spend? The third locker system is virtually identical to the second one that I just discussed, but instead of a solenoid engaging the lock mechanism, it is done with air. So the advantages are identical. The disadvantages are cost and complexity, as an air compressor system must be added to the vehicle, right? So again, how much time do you want to spend? If you already have a compressor installed because you have a nice capable off-road rig, then it doesn't really matter to you. All you do is run a line to your differentials. But if you don't, then you have to figure that one out. Now, the next aid that can be used in conjunction with a four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive system is limited slip differentials. Limited slip differentials are the next best thing to a locker, and come very close to making your vehicle a true 4x4. Limited slip uses clutch packs or oil pumps to couple both wheels of a differential when slip at one wheel is detected. The advantage are it's just a seamless operation without any driver intervention. No wiring or airlines, such as with the prior mentioned systems. The disadvantages are cost and reliability. As with all friction devices, there will be wear, and eventually the system will have to get serviced or repaired. Another disadvantage is a full lock cannot be achieved, as there will always be some losses due to heat or friction. That's the trade-off here. A Jeep Quattro Drive 2 system uses 3 of these differential mechanisms in all 3 differentials, front, rear, and center. Simple and dummy-proof way of basically going further and making sure that the Jeep four-wheel drive system is still relevant and really good, even in the Grand Cherokee. The third aid is torque vectoring. Now, torque vectoring is a big one. I think torque vectoring was pioneered by Land Rover with their terrain response system. Correct me if I'm wrong. Torque vectoring is a system that attempts to distribute power to the wheel with the most traction by aid of electronics and or mechanicals. Like I said, the Land Rover terrain response system is by far the best example of an electronic vectoring system. If you couple that system with lockers or limited slip, you have a system that's basically top-notch and unstoppable. How it works is it monitors wheel speeds and will brake a runaway wheel to attempt to transfer power to the wheels with the traction. It's extremely effective on rutted or rocky terrain. Most higher-end four-wheel drive systems will have torque vectoring these days, but manufacturers are starting to put them into basically everything. Subaru's symmetrical all-wheel drive has torque vectoring. Most, just because all the way the system uses wheel speed sensors and all that stuff, it's quite simple for them to just put the programming in to brake the wheel that starts spinning and send the power the other way. The advantage is that you can mimic the operation of a locker with electronics and go further. And that's the whole reason for the system to exist. The disadvantages are it's fairly slow to react because it has to detect the wheel spin and it has to it has to brake that wheel, and then it has to transfer the power to the other wheels. It's pretty noisy because the brakes come on and stuff really starts happening and it's fighting the gears. The other disadvantage is a true 25-25 on a front differential torque split cannot really be achieved. The system also relies on electronics. So the big thing here is if you damage a sensor off-road somewhere in the bush, or you have too much mud for the sensor to read correctly when you're stuck in a mud box somewhere, you essentially lose the whole system because the electronics will no longer be able to monitor what it's doing. There's also a mechanical torque vectoring, which relies on specially designed gears, as well as some driver input to transfer power to the wheel with the most traction. The best example of this system was in a Hummer H1, for instance. A driver would gently apply the brakes when wheels would start to spin, and the power transfer would occur. The advantages are simplicity, no extra electronics are required. The disadvantages are effectiveness. There's quite a bit of skill required to operate a system like that. You have to modulate the brake pedal nicely, so you have to really listen and feel the vehicle. Another example of mechanical torque vectoring would be the front differentials on some hot hatches, as Jeremy Clarkson would call them. By using clutches and electronics, they attempt to transfer power to avoid one tire fire and torque steer. But those are for another video. A Ford Focus RS or something like that will have a torque vectoring differential. Well, it looks like I finished. Let me know in the comments below if this helped you at all to understand the systems. If you want me to make extra videos to explain some of these systems, it's not a big deal for me. If I omitted anything or made mistakes, comment down below. I learn more when I actually talk and make these videos than I would just watching other videos. Subscribe and comment as usual, and cheers.